All right, so in this next video, let's delve into the action of the Trojan Saga, right? The action of the war. Again, most of Homer's depiction focuses on Achilles. He's Homer's definite tragic hero, and remember, what is his tragic flaw? Anger, right? Okay. Now remember, he does have a semi-divine birthright because he is a son of a goddess. However, he never boasts or really takes advantage of that status. He accomplishes everything as a mortal. Yes, maybe he does have some protection, but he still is going to die eventually. And in fact, the destiny of Achilles, if you want to know that right here, aside from his short life full of distinction or honor or glory, he is also fated to be slain by God and man before the capture of Troy. All right. So in the opening scene of the Iliad, this will go back to what should be a familiar story from our review of Apollo, right? The Apollo unit. Chryses is a priest of Apollo in the city of Troy. And his daughter, Chryseis, is kidnapped from the temple and held by Agamemnon as a concubine. So Chryses comes to Agamemnon to ask for the return of his daughter. But Agamemnon refuses, and not only does he refuse, but he actually insults Chryses, who then prays to Apollo to avenge his ill treatment. Apollo, enraged by the treatment of his priest, afflicts the Greek army with a plague. And so Agamemnon is forced to return Chryseis to her father to end the plague. However, apparently Agamemnon thinks that he needs to have a concubine at some point, and so he takes Achilles' concubine, Briseis. You don't need to know her name, but that's her name. So he takes Achilles' concubine as his own. Just straight up steals her from Achilles. Enraged at the dishonor that Agamemnon has inflicted upon him, Achilles decides he would no longer fight. He asks his mother Thetis to intercede with Zeus, who agreed to give the Trojans success as long as Achilles is not on the battlefield. And because he's the best warrior of the Greeks, it would make sense that they would not be as successful without him on the field. And again, this is where we have the pattern of the retiring hero. He goes out of the war, he will come back. Now, this particular experience is very important in the development of Achilles, especially in terms of his psyche. Remember, he has a tragic flaw, and a hero has to kind of work through that. So, this is what happens. When Achilles refuses to fight, Patroclus, who's kind of like his sidekick, I guess you could say, begs him to let him wear his armor and take his place on the battlefield. And so, dressed as Achilles, but without Achilles' skill and valor, Patroclus is spotted on the battlefield by Homer, who thinks it's Achilles, and Hector, did I say Hector? He's spotted on the battlefield by Hector, who thinks it's Achilles, and so he matches up against Hector, and this is an uneven match. It's not going to end well for Patroclus. And so Hector kills Patroclus, and it's only once he's killed Patroclus that he realizes that this is not Achilles. Menelaus recovers the corpse of Patroclus and returns it to the camp of the Greeks. Achilles is filled with guilt because of Patroclus's death, but also anger at Hector for killing Patroclus. And so this marks the return of the hero and the ultimate fulfillment of Achilles' destiny. He does reconcile with Agamemnon before re-embarking on the battlefield as a warrior, and that shows his nobility of character, right? His stability amongst the men. And he calls out Hector for a basically one-on-one matchup, again to appease his own guilt, but also to avenge Patroclus's death. Now the gods, as you can see here with the intervention of the gods here, the gods play a heavy role in the outcome between Hector and Achilles. Hector is actually killed through the gods' design because the death was decided on Mount Olympus. Athena also helps Achilles to kill Hector, and that might seem unfair, but not to the Greeks, remember. They appreciated that. The Moirai are a part of the story. They have the symbol of the scales, and so each hero was weighed, and Achilles is the one who came out on top of the scales, and that's how the victor was decided by the gods. Now, before their epic matchup, Hector wants Achilles to promise a humane oath that whoever the victor would be, the victor would give the bodies back to his people. Achilles, however, does not swear that oath. Homer presents both Achilles and Hector respectively, Hector in terms of wanting this oath and being willing to fulfill it, but because Achilles doesn't swear that oath, Hector does not expect Achilles to honor that oath, and in fact, that is exactly what doesn't happen, right? When Achilles defeats Hector, he defiles Hector's body by dragging it behind his chariot, as you can see here in this depiction of the painting, and it's through that that Achilles is able to vent all of his anger. He does eventually return Hector's body to his people, and it's at that point that his grief for Patroclus is complete, and he is once again a noble warrior. All right, that's his final release. The moral tragedy is complete, and the funeral of Hector marks the end of the Iliad, but not the end of the war, remember. So we'll go next to what happens at the end of the war. This is outside of the Homeric version. So first of all, remember that Achilles is fated to die at the hands of the gods and man before the end of the war. And so it's kind of complicated, all right? So first of all, Achilles, this is under the defeat of the Amazons and Ethiopians, right? Achilles, after his temporary truce with Priam, he has a temporary truce with Priam in order to return Hector's body to his family. So after this truce, he fights and kills the Amazonian warrior queen Penthesilea. And he later grieves over her death. So the Amazons are on the side of the Trojans. Okay, so at first he is so distracted by Penthesilea's beauty that he does not fight her as intensely as usual. But once he realized that his distraction by her beauty was endangering his life, he refocuses and kills her. But then he grieves over the death of such a rare beauty. And a notorious Greek by the name of Thersites laughs and mocks the great Achilles for grieving over his own kill. Another episode is with Memnon. So following the death of Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion was Nestor's son Antilochus. Nestor is the oldest warrior, if you'll remember. When Memnon, king of Ethiopia, kills Antilochus, Ethiopia is also allied with Troy. Okay, so when Memnon, the king of Ethiopia, kills Antilochus, Achilles once more gets revenge on the battlefield by killing Memnon. The fight between Achilles and Memnon over Antilochus echoes that of Achilles and Hector over Patroclus, except that Memnon was also a son of a goddess, so it's two demigods. Hector was not a demigod. Now, in the end, in Achilles' death, Paris is the one who shoots the arrow and kills Achilles by shooting him in the heel. The arrow is guided by Apollo, but Paris is not given any honor for killing Achilles. Remember, typically in Greek mythology, it didn't matter if they had a god or goddess's help, but Paris gets no honor for killing Achilles. Achilles is cremated, and his ashes are buried in the same urn as those of Patroclus. And in the afterlife, in the Homeric version of the Odyssey, Odysseus meets Achilles in the underworld, in the same area as where all of the dead will congregate. But in later versions, Achilles is depicted in Elysium, the Isle of the Blessed. After Achilles is killed, there is a battle over his armor. All of the Greek heroes compete for Achilles' honor by giving speeches on why they were the bravest after Achilles, and their Trojan prisoners of war, who were the listeners to these speeches, came to the consensus that Odysseus, of course, he's a famed orator, would be the winner. Now, the main competitors over this armor were Ajax, remember he was second only to Achilles in the first place, and Odysseus. All right, so they favored Odysseus and awarded him the armor. Furious, Ajax curses Odysseus, which earns the ire of Athena, because Odysseus is one of her favorites. So Athena temporarily makes Ajax so mad with grief and anguish that he begins killing sheep, thinking they are his comrades. After a while, Athena lifts his madness, and Ajax, realizing that he had actually been killing sheep, was left so ashamed that he commits suicide. And so that is the death of Ajax, son of Telamon. The good Ajax, not the lesser Ajax. Now, another version in Ovid, this is the Roman version, says that the ghost of Achilles demands that Polyxena be sacrificed and be a part of his spoils. So it's kind of odd, but that's part of the story of the death of Achilles and the consequences of it. All right, the fall of Troy. Helenus is a son of Priam, and Helenus, traitor, reveals to the Greeks that they could defeat Troy if they could acquire the poisonous arrows of Heracles, which, if you remember, are in Philoctetes' possession, and he was left on the Isle of Lemnos with his stinky, wounded foot. Secondly, they had to steal the Palladium, and that's what led to the infamous wooden horse of Troy, so they could sneak into the city and steal it. And finally, if they put Achilles' son, Neoptolemus, in the war, then it would be concluded. And in fact, Neoptolemus winds up killing 6 men on the battlefield, all by himself at the conclusion. So the strategy of the Greeks is this wooden horse. All right. Sinon is supposedly the only Greek who is left behind, and he is left behind to make the Trojans think that he had forsworn his loyalties, and he explains to them that they have dismantled their ships and created this Trojan horse, this huge wooden horse. Now Cassandra, princess of Troy with the gift of prophecy that no one ever believes, so of course that didn't work, and Laocoon, a priest of Apollo, both said that evil will come if the Trojans accepted the horse. Now, Cassandra's not a worry because nobody believes her, remember? But Laocoon is a problem because they do believe his prophecies, so he winds up being killed with 2 big serpents, and his sons are also killed as well. So, they accept the horse. And in fact, they have to tear down part of their own wall to fit the horse inside. Remember the wall that was built by Apollo and Poseidon? Yeah. They had to tear part of it down, supposedly, to get this huge wooden horse in. As an advisor to Priam during the Trojan War, Antenor, that's this guy here, right? Where's my cursor? Where'd it go? Hello. It's over here somewhere. Oh, forget it. Next to last thing here, Antenor. He has advised that his fellow townsmen send Helen back to the Greeks. He's done this for 10 years. So finally, in the end, he winds up proving to be friendly to the Greeks and an advocate of peace. In a late story of the Trojan War, he was said to have treacherously opened the gates of Troy to the enemy. But remember, that would defeat the purpose of the whole Trojan horse thing, right? So again, late version. And in that version, in return for opening the gates, at the general sack of the city, his house was marked by a panther skin at the door, and it was spared by the victors. So his house would be the only thing that was left. All right, so that's Antenor, who was a counselor to Priam and ends up being friendly to the Greeks and being an advocate of peace. The fate of the royal family. We already know that Hector was killed by Achilles. Paris, if you forgot, is defeated by Philoctetes. He's shot with one of Heracles' poisoned arrows. If you remember that, okay? And Priam, the king, and his infant son is thrown over the wall of the city and killed. His wife, Hecuba, is made a slave and given to Odysseus. And if you remember, Cassandra seeks shelter in the temple of Athena and is dragged out by Ajax and raped by her. And remember that his family had to pay for that crime until about 100 AD by sending a family member to serve in that temple. Their passage to the temple was not secured, but if they actually made it, then they would be protected. All right, so that is the end of the Trojan War. So what we get into in this very last set of video lectures is the nostoi, or the return of the heroes. So we will be talking about the return of Menelaus, Agamemnon, and of course, probably the most famous of journeys, Odysseus's journey, which is depicted in Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. All right, so that will be our last part of the class.